Hello friends, and welcome to the fifth installment in this calm reading of 5 Children and It. Tonight I will be reading for you 2 chapters. Chapter 6, A Castle and No Dinner, and Chapter 7, A Siege and Bed. Talking about bed, let us find that special place where we can safely relax, unwind, and let us begin these 2 chapters. A castle and no dinner. The others were to be kept in as a punishment for the misfortunes of the day before. Of course, Martha thought it was naughtiness and not misfortune. So you must not blame her. She only thought she was doing her duty. You know, grown-up people often say they do not like to punish you, and that they only do it for your own good, and that it hurts them as much as it hurts you. And this is really very often the truth. Martha certainly hated having to punish the children quite as much as they hated to be punished. For one thing, she knew what a noise there would be in the house all day, and she had other reasons. "I declare," she said to the cook, "it seems almost a shame keeping of them indoors this lovely day. But they are that audacious. They'll be walking in with their heads knocked off some of these days, if I don't put my foot down. You make them a cake for tea tomorrow, dear, and we'll have baby along of us soon as we've got a bit forward with our work. Then they can have a good romp with him out of the way. Now, Eliza, come, get on with them beds. Here's 10 o'clock nearly, and no rabbits caught. People say that in Kent, when they mean, and no work done." So all the others were kept in, but Robert, as I have said, was allowed to go out for half an hour to get something they all wanted. And that, of course, was the day's wish. He had no difficulty in finding the sand fairy, for the day was already so hot that it had actually, for the first time, come out of its own accord, and it was sitting in a sort of pool of soft sand, stretching itself and trimming its whiskers, and turning its snail's eyes round and round. "Ha!" it said when its left eye saw Robert. "I've been looking out for you. Where are the rest of you? Not smashed themselves up with those wings, I hope?" "No," said Robert, "but the wings got us into a row, just like all the wishes always do. So the others are kept indoors, and I was only let out for half an hour to get the wish. So please let me wish as quickly as I can." "Wish away," said the psammead, twisting itself round in the sand. But Robert couldn't wish away. He forgot all the things he had been thinking about, and nothing would come into his head but little things for himself, like toffee, a foreign stamp album, or a clasp knife with 3 blades and a corkscrew. He sat down to think better, but it was no use. He could only think of things the others would not have cared for, such as a football or a pair of leg guards, or to be able to lick Simpkins Minor thoroughly when he went back to school. "Well," said the psammead at last, "you'd better hurry up with that wish of yours. Time flies." "I know it does," said Robert. "I can't think of what to wish for. I wish you could give one of the others their wish without their having to come here to ask for it." "Oh, don't." But it was too late. The psammead had blown itself out to about 3 times its proper size, and now it collapsed like a pricked bubble, and with a deep sigh leaned back against the edge of its sandpool, quite faint with effort. "There," it said in a weak voice. "It was tremendously hard, but I did it. Run along home, or they're sure to wish for something silly before you get there." They were quite sure. Robert felt this, and as he ran home, his mind was deeply occupied with the sort of wishes he might find they had wished in his absence. They might wish for rabbits, or white mice, or chocolate, or a fine day tomorrow, or even— and that was most likely. Someone might have said, "I do wish to goodness Robert would hurry up." Well, he was hurrying up, and so they would have their wish, and the day would be wasted. Then he tried to think what they could wish for. Something that would be amusing indoors. That had been his own difficulty from the beginning. So few things are amusing indoors when the sun is shining outside and you mayn't go out, however much you want to. Robert was running as fast as he could. But when he turned the corner that ought to have brought him within sight of the architect's nightmare, the ornamental ironwork on the top of the house, he opened his eyes so wide that he had to drop into a walk. For you cannot run with your eyes wide open. Then suddenly he stopped short, for there was no house to be seen. The front garden railings were gone too, and where the house had stood, Robert rubbed his eyes and looked again. Yes, the others had wished. There was no doubt about that, and they must have wished that they lived in a castle. For there the castle stood, black and stately, and very tall and broad, with battlements and lancet windows, and 8 great towers. And where the garden and the orchard had been, there were white things dotted like mushrooms. Robert walked slowly on, and as he got nearer, he saw that these were tents, and men in armor were walking about among the tents, crowds and crowds of them. "Oh, crikey!" said Robert fervently. "They have. They've wished for a castle, and it's being besieged. It's just like that sand fairy. I wish we'd never seen the beastly thing." At the little window above the great gateway, across the moat that now lay where the garden had been, but half an hour ago, someone was waving something pale dust-colored. Robert thought it was one of Cyril's handkerchiefs. They had never been white since the day when he had upset the bottle of combined toning and fixing solution into the drawer where they were. Robert waved back, and immediately felt that he had been unwise, for his signal had been seen by the besieging force, and 2 men in steel caps were coming towards him. They had high brown boots on their long legs, and they came towards him with such great strides that Robert remembered the shortness of his own legs, and did not run away. He knew it would be useless to himself, and he feared it might be irritating to the foe. So he stood still, and the 2 men seemed quite pleased with him. "By my halidom," said one, "a brave varlet this." Robert felt pleased at being called brave, and somehow it made him feel brave. He passed over the varlet. It was the way people talked in historical romances for the young. He knew, and it was evidently not meant for rudeness. He only hoped he would be able to understand what they said to him. He had not always been able quite to follow the conversations in the historical romances for the young. "His garb is strange," said the other. "Some outlandish treachery, belike. Say, lad, what brings thee hither?" Robert knew this meant, "Now then, youngster, what are you up to here, eh?" So he said, "If you please, I want to go home." "Go then," said the man in the longest boots. "None hindereth, and naught lets us to follow. Zooks," he added in a cautious undertone, "I misdoubt me, but he beareth tidings to the besieged." "Where dwellest thou, young knave?" inquired the man with the largest steel cap. "Over there," said Robert, and directly he had said it, he knew he ought to have said, "Yonder." "Ha, sayest so?" rejoined the longest boots. "Come hither, boy. This is a matter for our leader." And to the leader Robert was dragged forthwith by the reluctant ear. The leader was the most glorious creature Robert had ever seen. He was exactly like the pictures Robert had so often admired in the historical romances. He had armor, and a helmet, and a horse, and a crest, and feathers, and a shield, and a lance, and a sword. His armor and his weapons were all, I am almost sure, of quite different periods. The shield was 13th century, while the sword was of the pattern used in the Peninsular War. The cuirass was of the time of Charles I, and the helmet dated from the Second Crusade. The arms on the shield were very grand, 3 red running lions on a blue ground. The tents were of the latest brand, and the whole appearance of camp, army, and leader might have been a shock to some. But Robert was dumb with admiration, and it all seemed to him perfectly correct, because he knew no more of heraldry or archaeology than the gifted artists who usually drew the pictures for the historical romances. The scene was indeed exactly like a picture. He admired it all so much that he felt braver than ever. "Come hither, lad," said the glorious leader, when the man in Cromwellian steel caps had said a few low, eager words. And he took off his helmet, because he could not see properly with it on. He had a kind face and long fair hair. "Have no fear, thou shalt take no scathe," he said. Robert was glad of that. He wondered what scathe was, and if it was nastier than the senility which he had to take sometimes. "Unfold thy tale without alarm," said the leader kindly. "Whence comest thou, and what is thine intent?" "My what?" said Robert. "What seekest thou to accomplish? What is thine errand, that thou wanderest here, alone, among these rough men at arms? Poor child, thy mother's heart aches for thee e'en now, I'll warrant me." "I don't think so," said Robert. "You see, she doesn't know I'm out." The leader wiped away a manly tear, exactly as a leader in a historical romance would have done, and said, "Fear not to speak the truth, my child. Thou hast not to fear from Wilfred the Talbot." Robert had a wild feeling that this glorious leader of the besieging party, being himself part of a wish, would be able to understand better than Martha, or the gypsies, or the policeman in Rochester, or the clergyman of yesterday, the true tale of the wishes and the psamate. The only difficulty was that he knew he could never remember enough quathas and beshrews and things like that to make his talk sound like the talk of a boy in a historical romance. However, he began boldly enough, with a sentence straight out of Ralph de Courcy, or the Boy Crusader. He said, "Gramercy for thy courtesy, fair Sir Knight. The fact is, it's like this, and I hope you're not in a hurry, because the story's rather a breather. Father and mother are away, and when we were down playing in the sandpits, we found a psammead. I cry thee mercy. A psammead? Said the knight. Yes, a sort of fairy or enchanter. Yes, that's it, an enchanter. And he said we could have a wish every day, and we wished first to be beautiful. Thy wish was scarce granted, muttered one of the men at arms, looking at Robert, who went on as if he had not heard, though he thought the remark was very rude indeed. And then we wished for money, treasure, you know, but we couldn't spend it. And yesterday we wished for wings, and we got them, and we had a ripping time to begin with. Thy speech is strange and uncouth, said Sir Wilfrid the Talbot. Repeat thy words. What hadst thou? A ripping, I mean a jolly, no, we were contented with our lot. That's what I mean. Only after that we got into an awful fix. What is a fix? A fray mayhap? No, not a fray. A tight place. A dungeon? Alas, for thy youthful fretted limbs, said the knight, with polite sympathy. It wasn't a dungeon. We just encountered undeserved misfortunes. Robert explained. And today we are punished by not being allowed to go out. That's where I live, he pointed to the castle. The others are in there, and they are not allowed to go out. It's all the psammead's, I mean the enchanter's fault. I wish we had never seen him. He is an enchanter of might. Oh yes, of might and main, rather. And thou deemest that it is the spell of the enchanter, whom thou hast angered, that have lent strength to the besieging party, said the gallant leader. But know thou that Wilfrid the Talbot needs no enchanter's aid to lead his followers to victory. No, I'm sure you don't, said Robert with hasty courtesy. Of course not. You wouldn't, you know. But all the same, it's partly his fault, but we are most to blame. You couldn't have done anything if it hadn't been for us. How now, bold boy? Asked Sir Wilfrid haughtily. Thy speech is dark, and eke scarce courteous. Unravel me this riddle. Oh, said Robert desperately. Of course you don't know it, but you're not real at all. You're only here because the others must have been idiots enough to wish for a castle. And when the sun sets, you'll just vanish away, and it will be all right. The captain and the man-at-arms exchanged glances, at first pitying, and then sterner, as the longest-booted man said, Beware, noble my lord, the urchin doth but feign madness to escape from our clutches. Shall we not blind him? I am no more mad than you are, said Robert angrily. Perhaps not so much, only I was an idiot to think you'd understand anything. Let me go. I haven't done anything to you. Whither? Asked the knight, who seemed to have believed all the enchanter story till it came to his own share in it. Whither wouldst thou wend? Home, of course. Robert pointed to the castle. To carry news of succor? Nay. All right, then, said Robert, struck by a sudden idea. Then let me go somewhere else. His mind sought eagerly among his memories of the historical romance. Sir Wilfrid the Talbot, he said slowly, should think foul scorn, too, to keep a chap, I mean one who has done him no hurt, when he wants to cut off quietly, I mean to depart without violence. This to my face, beshrew thee for a knave, cried Sir Wilfrid. But the appeal seemed to have gone home. Yet thou sayest sooth, he added thoughtfully. Go where thou wilt, he added nobly, thou art free. Wolfert the Talbot warreth not with babes, and Jacken here shall bear thee company. All right, said Robert wildly. Jacken will enjoy himself, I think. Come on, Jacken. Sir Wolfert, I salute thee. He saluted after the modern military manner, and set off running to the sandpit, Jacken's long boots keeping up easily. He found the fairy. He dug it up. He woke it up. He implored it to give him one more wish. I've done 2 today already, it grumbled, and one was as stiff a bit of work as I ever did. Oh, do, said Robert, while Jacken looked on with an expression of open-mouthed horror at the strange beast that talked and gazed with its snail eyes at him. Well, what is it? Snapped the Psammead with cross sleepiness. I wish I was with the others, said Robert, and the Psammead began to swell. Robert never thought of wishing the castle and the siege away. Of course, he knew they had all come out of a wish, but swords and daggers and pikes and lances seemed much too real to be wished away. Robert lost consciousness for an instant. When he opened his eyes, the others were crowding round him. We never heard you come in, they said. How awfully jolly of you to wish it to give us our wish. Of course, we understood that was what you'd done. But you ought to have told us. Suppose we'd wished something silly. Silly? Said Robert very crossly indeed. How much sillier could you have been? I'd like to know. You nearly settled me, I can tell you. Then he told his story, and the others admitted that it certainly had been rough on him. But they praised his courage and cleverness so much that he presently got back his lost temper, and felt braver than ever, and consented to be captain of the besieged force. We haven't done anything yet, said Anthea comfortably. We waited for you. We're going to shoot at them through these little loopholes with the bow and arrows Uncle gave you, and you shall have first shot. I don't think I would, said Robert cautiously. You don't know what they're like near to. They've got real bows and arrows, and awful length, and swords, and pikes, and daggers, and all sorts of sharp things. They're all quite real. It's not just a picture or a vision or anything. They can hurt us, or kill us even. I shouldn't wonder. I can feel my ear all sore still. Look here, have you explored the castle? Because I think we'd better let them alone as long as they let us alone. I heard that Jacken men say they weren't going to attack till just before sundown. We can be getting ready for the attack. Are there any soldiers in the castle to defend it? We don't know, said Cyril. You see, directly I'd wished we were in a besieged castle. Everything seemed to go upside down, and when it came straight, we looked out of the window and saw the camp and things and you. And of course we kept on looking at everything. Isn't this room jolly? It's as real as real. It was. It was square, with stone walls 4 feet thick, and great beams for ceiling. A low door at the corner led to a flight of steps, up and down. The children went down. They found themselves in a great arched gatehouse. The enormous doors were shut and barred. There was a window in a little room at the bottom of the round turret, up which the stairs wound. Rather larger than the other windows, and looking through it they saw that the drawbridge was up and the portcullis down. The moat looked very wide and deep. Opposite the great door that led to the moat was another great door, with a little door in it. The children went through this and found themselves in a big paved courtyard. with the great grey walls of the castle rising dark and heavy on all four sides. Near the middle of the courtyard stood Martha, moving her right hand backwards and forwards in the air. The cook was stooping down and moving her hands, also in a very curious way. But the oddest and at the same time most terrible thing was the lamb, who was sitting on nothing about 3 feet from the ground, laughing happily. The children ran towards him. Just as Anthea was reaching out her arms to take him, Martha said crossly, "Let him alone. Do, miss, when he is good." "But what's he doing?" said Anthea. "Doing? Why, setting in his high chair as good as gold, a precious, watching me doing the ironing. Get along with you, do. My iron's cold again." She went towards the cook and seemed to poke an invisible fire with an unseen poker. The cook seemed to be putting an unseen dish into an invisible oven. "Run along with you, do," she said. "I'm behindhand as it is. You won't get no dinner if you come a-hindering of me like this. Come, off you goes. Or I'll pin a dishcloth to some of your tails." "You're sure the lamb's all right?" asked Jane anxiously. "Right as 9 pence. If you don't come unsettling of him. I thought you'd like to be rid of him for today, but take him if you want him, for gracious sake." "No, no," they said, and hastened away. They would have to defend the castle presently. The lamb was safer, even suspended in mid-air, in an invisible kitchen, than in the guard-room of a besieged castle. They went through the first doorway they came to, and sat down helplessly on a wooden bench that ran along the room inside. "How awful," said Anthea and Jane together, and Jane added, "I feel as if I was in a mad asylum." "What does it mean?" Anthea said. "It's creepy. I don't like it. I wish we'd wished for something plain, a rocking horse, or a donkey, or something." "It's no use wishing now," said Robert bitterly, and Cyril said, "Do dry up a sec. I want to think." He buried his face in his hands, and the others looked about them. They were in a long room with an arched roof. There were wooden tables along it, and one across at the end of the room, on a sort of raised platform. The room was very dim and dark. The floor was strewn with dry things like sticks, and they did not smell nice. Cyril sat up suddenly and said, "Look here, it's all right. I think it's like this. You know, we wish that the servants shouldn't notice any difference when we got wishes, and nothing happens to the lamb unless we specially wish it to. So, of course, they don't notice the castle or anything. But then the castle is on the same place where our house was. I mean, and the servants have to go on being in the house, or else they would notice. But you can't have a castle mixed up with our house, and so we can't see the house. Because we see the castle, and they can't see the castle, because they go on seeing the house, and so—" "Oh, don't," said Jane. "You make my head go all swimmy, like being on a roundabout. It doesn't matter. Only I hope we shall be able to see our dinner, that's all. Because if it's invisible, it will be unfeelable as well, and then we can't eat it. I know it will, because I tried to feel if I could feel the lamb's chair, and there was nothing under him at all but air. And we can't eat air, and I feel just as if I hadn't had any breakfast for years and years." "It's no use thinking about it," said Anthea. "Let's go on exploring. Perhaps we might find something to eat." This lightened hope in every breast, and they went on exploring the castle. But though it was the most perfect and delightful castle you can possibly imagine, and furnished in the most complete and beautiful manner. Neither food nor men-at-arms were to be found in it. If only you thought of wishing to be besieged in a castle, thoroughly garrisoned and provisioned, said Jane reproachfully. You can't think of everything, you know, said Anthea. I should think it must be nearly dinner-time by now. It wasn't. But they hung about watching the strange movements of the servants in the middle of the courtyard, because, of course, they couldn't be sure where the dining-room of the invisible house was. Presently they saw Martha carrying an invisible tray across the courtyard, for it seemed that, by the most fortunate accident, the dining-room of the house and the banqueting hall of the castle were in the same place. But oh, how their hearts sank when they perceived that the tray was invisible. They waited in wrenched silence, while Martha went through the form of carving an unseen leg of mutton and serving invisible greens and potatoes with a spoon that no one could see. When she had left the room, the children looked at the empty table, and then at each other. This is worse than anything, said Robert, who had not till now been particularly keen on his dinner. I am not very hungry, said Anthea, trying to make the best of things as usual. Cyril tightened his belt ostentatiously. Jane burst into tears. Chapter 7. A Siege and Bed. The children were sitting in the gloomy banqueting hall, at the end of one of the long bare wooden tables. There was now no hope. Martha had brought in the dinner, and the dinner was invisible, and unfeelable too. For when they rubbed their hands along the table, they knew but too well that for them there was nothing there but table. Suddenly Cyril felt in his pocket. "Right on," he cried. "Look here, biscuits." Rather broken and crumbled, certainly, but still biscuits. 3 whole ones, and a generous handful of crumbs and fragments. "I got them this morning. Cook. And I'd quite forgotten," he explained as he divided them with scrupulous fairness into 4 heaps. They were eaten in a happy silence, though they tasted a little oddly, because they had been in Cyril's pocket all the morning, with a hank of tart twine, some green fire cones, and a ball of cobbler's wax. "Yes, but look here, Squirrel," said Robert. "You're so clever at explaining about invisibleness and all that. How is it the biscuits are here, and all the bread and meat and things have disappeared?" "I don't know," said Cyril after a pause, "unless it's because we had them. Nothing about us has changed. Everything's in my pocket all right." "Then if we had the mutton, it would be real," said Robert. "Oh, don't I wish we could find it. But we can't find it. I suppose it isn't ours till we've got it in our mouths." "Or in our pockets," said Jane, thinking of the biscuits. "Who puts mutton in their pockets, goose girl?" said Cyril. "But I know, at any rate, I'll try it." He leaned over the table with his face about an inch from it, and kept opening and shutting his mouth as if he were taking bites out of air. "It's no good," said Robert in deep dejection. "You'll only— Hello!" Cyril stood up with a grin of triumph, holding a square piece of bread in his mouth. It was quite real. Everyone saw it. It is true that, directly he bit a piece off, the rest vanished. But it was all right, because he knew he had it in his hand, though he could neither see nor feel it. He took another bite from the air between his fingers, and it turned into bread as he bit. The next moment all the others were following his example, and opening and shutting their mouths an inch or so from the bare-looking table. Robert captured a slice of mutton, but I think I will draw a veil over the rest of this painful scene. It is enough to say that they all had enough mutton, and that when Martha came to change the plates, she said she had never seen such a mess in all her born days. The pudding, fortunately, a plain suet roly-poly, and in answer to Martha's question, the children all with one accord said that they would not have treacle on it. No jam, no sugar. Just plain, please, they said. Martha said, "Well, I never. What next, I wonder?" and went away. Then ensued another scene, on which I will not dwell, for nobody looks nice picking up slices of suet pudding from the table in its mouth like a dog. The great thing, after all, was that they had had dinner, and now everyone felt more courage to prepare for the attack that was to be delivered before sunset. Robert, as captain, insisted on climbing to the top of one of the towers to reconnoiter. So up they all went. And now they could see all round the castle, and could see, too, that beyond the moat, on every side, the tents of the besieging party were pitched. Rather uncomfortable shivers ran down the children's backs, as they saw that all the men were very busy cleaning or sharpening their arms, restringing their bows, and polishing their shields. A large party came along the road, with horses dragging along the great trunk of a tree, and Cyril felt quite pale, because he knew this was for a battering ram. "What a good thing we've got a moat," he said, "and what a good thing the drawbridge is up. I should never have known how to work it. Of course it would be up in a besieged castle." "You think there ought to have been soldiers in it, wouldn't you?" said Robert. "You see, you don't know how long it's been besieged," said Cyril darkly. "Perhaps most of the brave defenders were killed quite early in the siege, and all the provisions eaten. And now there are only a few intrepid survivors. That's us, and we're going to defend it to the death." "How do you begin? Defending to the death, I mean?" asked Anthea. "We ought to be heavily armed, and then shoot at them when they advance to the attack. They used to pour boiling lead down the besiegers when they got too close," said Anthea. "Father showed me the holes on purpose for pouring it down through at Bodiam Castle. And there are holes like it in the gate tower here." "I think I'm glad it's only a game." "It is only a game, isn't it?" said Jane. But no one answered. The children found plenty of strange weapons in the castle, and if they were armed at all, it was soon plain that they would be, as Cyril said, armed heavily. For these swords and lances and crossbows were far too weighty even for Cyril's manly strength, and as for the longbows, none of the children could even begin to bend them. The daggers were better, but Jane hoped that the besiegers would not come close enough for daggers to be of any use. "Never mind, we can hurl them like javelins," said Cyril, "or drop them on people's heads. I say, there are lots of stones on the other side of the courtyard. If we took some of those up, just to drop on their heads, if they were to try swimming the moat." So a heap of stones grew apace, up in the room above the gate, and another heap, a shiny, spiky, dangerous-looking heap, of daggers and knives. As Anthea was crossing the courtyard for more stones, a sudden and valuable idea came to her. She went to Martha and said, "May we just have biscuits for tea? We're going to play at besieged castles, and we'd like the biscuits to provision the garrison. Put mine in my pocket, please. My hands are so dirty. And I'll tell the others to fetch theirs." This was indeed a happy thought, for now, with 4 gorgeous handfuls of air, which turned to biscuits as Martha crammed it into their pockets, the garrison was well provisioned till sundown. They brought up some iron pots of cold water to pour on the besiegers instead of hot lead, with which the castle did not seem to be provided. The afternoon passed with wonderful quickness. It was very exciting, but none of them, except Robert, could feel all the time that this was real, deadly, dangerous work. To the others, who had only seen the camp and besiegers from a distance, the whole thing seemed half a game of make-believe, and half a splendidly distinct and perfectly safe dream. But it was only now and then that Robert could feel this. When it seemed to be tea time, the biscuits were eaten with water from the deep well in the courtyard, drunk out of horns. Cyril insisted on putting by 8 of the biscuits, in case anyone should feel faint in stress of battle. Just as he was putting away the reserved biscuits in a sort of little stone cupboard without a door, a sudden sound made him drop 3. It was the loud, fierce cry of a trumpet. "You see, it is real," said Robert, "and they are going to attack." All rushed to the narrow windows. "Yes," said Robert, "they're all coming out of the tents and moving about like ants. There's that Jachin dancing about where the bridge joins on. I wish he could see me put my tongue out at him. Yeah." The others were far too pale to wish to put their tongues out at anybody. They looked at Robert with surprised respect. Anthea said, "You really are brave, Robert." "Rot!" Cyril's parlor turned to redness now, all in a minute. "He's been getting ready to be brave all the afternoon. And I wasn't ready, that's all. I shall be braver than he is in half a jiffy." "Oh dear," said Jane, "what does it matter which of you is the bravest?" "I think Cyril was a perfect silly to wish for a castle, and I don't want to play." "It isn't—" Robert was beginning sternly, but Anthea interrupted. "Oh, yes, you do," she said coaxingly. "It's a very nice game, really, because they can't possibly get in. And if they do, the women and children are always spared by civilized armies." "But are you quite sure they are civilized?" asked Jane, panting. "They seem to be such a long time ago." "Of course they are." Anthea pointed cheerfully through the narrow window. "Why, look at the little flags of their lances. How bright they are, and how fine the leader is. Look at him, isn't it, Robert? On the grey horse." Jane consented to look, and the scene was almost too pretty to be alarming. The green turf, the white tents, the flashing of pennant lances, the gleam of armor, and the bright colors of scarf and tunic. It was just like a splendid colored picture. The trumpets were sounding, and when the trumpets stopped for breath, the children could hear the clang-clang of armor and the murmur of voices. A trumpeter came forward to the edge of the moat, which now seemed very much narrower than at first, and blew the longest and loudest blast they had ever heard. When the blaring noise had died away, a man who was with the trumpeter shouted, "What ho, within there!" and his voice came plainly to the garrison in the gatehouse. "Hello there!" Robert bellowed back at once. "In the name of our lord the king, and of our good lord and trusty leader, Sir Wilfred D. Talbot, we summon this castle to surrender, on pain of fire and sword and no quarter. Do ye surrender?" "No," bawled Robert. "Of course we don't. Never, never, never." The man answered back, "Then your fate be on your own heads." "Cheer," said Robert in a fierce whisper. Cheer to show them we aren't afraid, and rattle the daggers to make more noise. 1, 2, 3. Hip, hip, hooray! Again. Hip, hip, hooray! One more. Hip, hip, hooray! Cheers were rather high and weak, but the rattle of the daggers lent them strength and depth. There was another shout from the camp across the moat, and then the beleaguered fortress felt that the attack had indeed begun. It was getting dark in the room above the great gate, and Jane took a very little courage, as she remembered that sunset couldn't be far off now. "The moat is dreadfully thin," said Anthea. "But they can't get into the castle, even if they do swim over," said Robert. And as he spoke, he heard feet on the stair outside, heavy feet, and the clank of steel. No one breathed for a moment. The steel and the feet went on up the turret stairs. Then Robert sprang softly to the door. He pulled off his shoes. "Wait here," he whispered, and stole quickly and softly after the boots and the spur clank. He peeped into the upper room. The man was there, and it was shaking, all dripping with moat water, and he was fiddling about with the machinery which Robert felt sure worked the drawbridge. Robert banged the door suddenly and turned the great key in the lock, just as Jakin sprang to the inside of the door. Then he tore downstairs and into the little turret at the foot of the tower, where the biggest window was. "We ought to have defended this," he cried to the others as they followed him. He was just in time. Another man had swum over, and his fingers were on the window ledge. Robert never knew how the man had managed to climb up out of the water, but he saw the clinging fingers, and hit them as hard as he could with an iron bar that he caught up from the floor. The man fell with a plop plash into the moat water. In another moment Robert was outside the little room, had banged its door, and was shooting home the enormous bolts, and calling to Cyril to lend a hand. Then they stood in the arched gatehouse, breathing hard and looking at each other. Jane's mouth was open. "Cheer up, Jenny," said Robert. "It won't last much longer." There was a creaking above, and something rattled and shook. The pavement they stood on seemed to tremble. Then a crash told them that the drawbridge had been lowered to its place. "That's that beast Jakin," said Robert. "There's still the portcullis. I'm almost certain that's worked from the lower down." And now the drawbridge rang and echoed hollowly to the hoofs of horses and tramp of armed men. "Up, quick!" cried Robert. "Let's drop things on them." Even the girls were feeling almost brave now. They followed Robert quickly, and under his direction began to drop stones out through the long narrow windows. There was a confused noise below, and some groans. "Oh dear," said Anthea, putting down the stone she was just going to drop out. "I'm afraid we've hurt somebody." Robert caught up the stone in a fury. "I should just hope we had," he said. "I'd give something for a jolly good boiling kettle of lead. Surrender, indeed." And now came more tramping, and a pause, and then the thundering thump of the battering ram, and the little room was almost quite dark. "We've held it, cried Robert. "We won't surrender, and the sun must set in a minute. Here, they're all jawing underneath again. Pity there's no time to get more stones. Here, pour that water down on them. It's no good, of course, but they'll hate it." "Oh dear," said Jane, "don't you think we better surrender?" "Never," said Robert. "We'll have a parley if you like, but we'll never surrender. Oh, I'll be a soldier when I grow up. You'll see if I don't. I won't go into the civil service, whatever anyone says." Let's wave a handkerchief and ask for a parley, Jane pleaded. I don't believe the sun's going to set tonight at all. Give them the water first, the brutes, said the bloodthirsty Robert. So, Anthea tilted the pot over the nearest lead hole and poured. They heard a splash below, but no one below seemed to have felt it, and again the ram battered the great door. Anthea paused. How idiotic, said Robert, lying flat on the floor and putting one eye to the lead hole. Of course, the holes go straight down into the gatehouse. That's for when the enemy has got past the door and the portcullis, and almost all is lost. Here, hand me the pot. He crawled on to the three-cornered window ledge in the middle of the wall, and, taking the pot from Anthea, poured the water out through the arrow slit. And as he began to pour, the noise of the battering ram and the trampling of the foe, and the shouts of "Surrender!" and "The Talbot forever!" all suddenly stopped and went out like the snuff of a candle. The little dark room seemed to whirl round and turn topsy-turvy, and when the children came to themselves, they were safe and sound in the big front bedroom of their own house. The house with the ornament nightmare iron top to the roof. They all crowded to the window and looked out. The moat and the tents and the besieging force were all gone, and there was the garden with its tangle of dahlias and marigolds and asters and late roses, and the spiky iron railings and the quiet white road. Everyone drew a deep breath. "And that's all right," said Robert. "I told you so. And I say, we didn't surrender, did we?" "Aren't you glad now I wished for a castle?" asked Cyril. "I think I am now," said Anthea slowly. "But I wouldn't wish for it again, I think, squirrel dear." "Oh, it was simply splendid," said Jane unexpectedly. "I wasn't frightened a bit." "Oh, I say," Cyril was beginning, but Anthea stopped him. "Look here," she said. "It's just come into my head. This is the very first thing we've wished for that hasn't got us into a row. And there hasn't been the least little scrap of a row about this. Nobody's raging downstairs. We're safe and sound. We've had an awfully jolly day. At least, not jolly exactly, but you know what I mean. And we know now how brave Robert is. And Cyril too, of course," she added hastily. "And Jane as well. And we haven't got into a row with a single grown-up." The door was opened, suddenly and fiercely. "You ought to be ashamed of yourselves," said the voice of Martha, and they could tell by her voice that she was very angry indeed. "I thought you couldn't last through the day without getting up to some doggery. A person can't take a breath of air on the front doorstep, but you must be emptying the washing-hand jug onto their heads. Off you go to bed, the lot of you, and try to get up better, children, in the morning. Now then, don't let me have to tell you twice. If I find any of you not in bed in 10 minutes, I'll let you know it. That's all. A new cap and everything." She flounced out amid a discouraged chorus of regrets and apologies. The children were very sorry, but really it was not their faults. You can't help it if you are pouring water on a besieging foe, and your castle suddenly changes into your house, and everything changes with it except the water, and that happens to fall on somebody else's clean cap. "I don't know why the water didn't change into nothing, though," said Cyril. "Why should it?" asked Robert. "Water's water all the world over. I expect the castle well was the same as ours in the stable-yard," said Jane. And that was really the case. I thought we couldn't get through a wish day without a row, said Cyril. It was much too good to be true. Come on, Bobs, my military hero. If we lick into bed sharp, she won't be so frumious. And perhaps she'll bong us up some supper. I'm jolly hungry. Good night, kids. Good night. Good night. I hope the castle won't come creeping back in the night, said Jane. Of course it won't, said Anthea briskly. But Martha will. Not in the night, but in a minute. Here, turn round. I'll get that knot out of your pinafore strings. Wouldn't it have been degrading for Sir Wilfrid de Talbot, said Jane dreamily, if he could have known that half the besieged garrison wore pinafores? And the other half knickerbockers. Yes, frightfully. Do stand still. You're only tightening the knot, said Anthea.